I think we're just gonna get back to it. Right? We left off last night in our comparison of the playtest. And I will remind you all, this is playtest material. The playtest of Pathfinder Second Edition. We left off on the concept of hero points. And what they do and how you earn them. I can see this is acting in a way kind of like inspiration. And there is its own. This is a kind of another currency that can be spent, and another way for you to influence the game in some form or fashion. We did touch upon the fact that it can be awkward, perhaps, because out of character, out of game actions have a mechanical influence on the earning of hero points. And I understand why they want to encourage people to bring snacks to the table, volunteer to keep track of the party funds, volunteer to draw the dungeon as you're exploring it. At the same time, by awarding mechanical currency to party members who are doing these actions, it takes the joy of volunteering, of stepping up and being selfless, and it can suddenly turn into an obligation. I feel obliged to do this, because if I don't, I'm not receiving a mechanical reward. And it can sully the experience. Now look, if we're a group of friends playing at our dinner table, and I think we used Jane as a made-up name and example. You know, Jane usually brings pizza or chips and dip or something along those lines. Or actually, in this case, so we have Sweet Pea Geek, and if you go and visit their stream, they have snacks laid out at their tabletop, and maybe Sweet Pea, out of her own volition, for wanting to play with friends, supplies the snacks for everyone at their sessions. Now we have a rule in a rule book stating that you get a reward, a mechanical reward, a currency to be spent for advantages in the game. And so now Sweet Pea is still bringing chips, and you know what? Maybe she brings better chips. Maybe she brings the same chips. But now, if she doesn't bring chips, she is not getting this reward or this function of the game. Or we question and we say, Sweet Pea, it's really nice you bring chips, but come on, we all know you're bringing chips just to earn hero points. And it can lead even subtly, even very subtly, to this kind of aggression, or it stirs a competitiveness that just didn't exist before. Because now there's the suggestion of an obligation. There's a suggestion that if you don't perform this out of character mechanic, you will not receive an in-game reward. I'm not going to call it a loot box, though it's a slightly similar concept, right? Because then, let's say that you die in that campaign session, and you say, "Oh, if I only had one more hero point, and I could have earned that hero point by doing something for the party or bringing snacks or whatever." But maybe I'm not the type of person who really feels comfortable doing that, or I don't play to draw maps. But now you say, "Oh, if I just had that one hero point that I could have gotten by bringing chips, my character's now dead in the campaign because I didn't perform a task pardon, that the playtest had asked me to do." These are examples. And you know what? This could be a 1 in 10,000 tabletop that you get this kind of resentment or interaction. Because by default, but as much as I'm cynical or I'm testing the boundaries of the playtest through our discussion. Because look, if this is a playtest, you have to stress test this stuff. You have to take these things into consideration if you're playtesting, because they can happen. Resentment can be bred at the tabletop. I've seen tabletop games of community and friendship, break up friendships or almost come to violence. And so maybe that's why I'm a little sensitive about turning something from a voluntary act of contribution into now yoking someone with an obligation to do something. Diadems! Welcome! As you can see, I have a potion of invisibility. Money? What money? What are you talking about, Diadems? If that is your real name. Pocket Punch. You have fulfilled the prophecy with your sacrifice. Thank you. Thank you and welcome, Pocket Punch. It's always appreciated. Alright, so now we're going to move on. Your perception measures your ability to notice things, search for what's hidden, and tell whether something about a situation is off. Sell it. Oh, the potion of invisibility? Right? That's true. Boy, I could get a fat, like, military research and development grant for something like this, right? It works though. You can't see any of my digestive tract. It's made it invisible. This statistic is frequently used for rolling initiative to determine who goes first in an encounter and for the seek action. You have a perception modifier based on your wisdom. Your class determines your proficiency in wisdom. It is good ghost water. Yes, Dark Wolf. Alright. Now, there are only 9 variables that go into your perception modifier. Not 10. There are only 9. And I want you to make sure that as we're playing this game and we're keeping the flow of combat smooth, we're keeping roleplay interactions smooth, we're keeping going through the dungeon running smooth, so I don't have to get an egg timer, like a 1 minute or a 2 minute little hourglass. This is what you have to do. So make notes if you must. Your perception modifier equals your wisdom modifier plus perception proficiency modifier plus circumstance bonus plus conditional bonus plus item bonus plus circumstance penalty plus conditional penalty plus item penalty plus untyped penalties. Okay, did you get that? Those are the only... Look, there are only 9 variables to calculate this. And I want to make sure everything's moving smoothly, okay? Bringing the egg timer is... Yeah, actually. If someone brings the egg timer and flips it, they are contributing to the group. And therefore, I am obligated by the rules as your GM to mechanically pay you in currency. Therefore, you become the GM's employee. And I know that this is harsh, or this could even seem hyperbolic. Again, though, we need to make sure we're stress testing things, and we're applying. We can look at this system with rose-colored glasses. But how many of you have sat down, even in the simplified D&D 5th edition format, let alone other ones? How many of you sat down and gone, everything is going to pot here? What is happening at my tabletop? Rules lawyering and bickering over a stripped-down, simplified version of D&D. Arguably the simplest, most accessible version of D&D. I mean, not of all fantasy role-playing games, of course. So it's something to consider. That said, we have not yet finished our examination of the entire playtest, and it is a playtest. So while I may bring things up with a grain of salt, you know, or kind of be a little snarky about it, I'm doing so with care and affection, because I want as many of you out there to play role-playing games. I don't care if it's D&D. You could play Dark Heresy, Made RPG, All Flesh Must Be Eaten, Paranoia. You could play 2nd edition D&D. You can play Lasers and Feelings, or if you want the nice variant, Tactical Waifu. You could play Honey Heist. I don't care what the system is. You could play Lamentations of the Flame Princess. But I want as many of you out there role-playing as possible, and therefore, by doing that, to have a good time and socialize. And so things that could threaten socialization, or things that undermine the social aspect of a role-playing game, kind of raise my hackles a little bit, and I get kind of defensive. Diadems, glad to be watching on something other than my phone. Hey, we're large and in charge now for you, Diadems. Though I hope... How is the presentation on a mobile platform, right? I don't have the luxury of while streaming necessarily. Well, I guess I could. It'd be kind of redundant, though. I'd be looking down the whole time and looking up and around. I hope that we still come through decently enough for you on the mobile on a mobile device. All right, so perception is used in many circumstances. In fact, it almost sounds like there's a little bit of insight in the 5th edition mechanics built into it. In many circumstances, such as when someone's trying to sneak past you, the GM will roll against your perception. Much like skill DCs, your perception DC is 10 plus your perception modifier. This is... It doesn't look like they call it your passive perception, but it does seem to be, in its own verbiage, a passive perception. The broadcast was good on mobile. I'm glad, Diadems. That makes me happy because a lot of you do watch Twitch, YouTube, etc. on mobile devices. And I really want to make sure that what we do here is accessible to you while you're mobile, you're laying in bed, you're in your car, listening along as you're driving or whatnot, but no distracted driving now. Tut tut. The amount of light can affect how well you see things. There are 3 levels of light: bright, dim, and darkness. The rules in this book are presented assuming all creatures are in bright light. Areas of shadow or lit by weak light sources are dim. Creatures and objects in dim light are concealed to creatures that don't have blind sense, blind sight, dark vision, or low light vision. A creature or object in darkness is considered unseen to those without blind sense, blind sight, or dark vision. A creature without these senses is blinded while in darkness, though it might be able to see lit areas beyond the darkness. If a creature can see into a lit area, it can target creatures within that lit area, but it treats such targets as concealed. Dark Wolf, as someone who was exclusively watching on mobile since I started, your stream works perfectly fine on mobile. Thank you very much for that feedback, Dark Wolf. Senses. The ways a creature can use perception depend on its senses. Precise and imprecise senses. A typical character has 2 prominent senses, vision and hearing. Vision is a precise sense, a sense that can be used to perceive the world in nuanced detail. The only way to target a creature without having drawbacks is to use a precise sense. You can usually see a creature automatically with a precise sense unless that creature is hiding or obscured by the environment, in which case you have to use the seek action to detect the creature. Hearing is an imprecise sense. It isn't sufficient to make out the full range of detail that a precise sense can. You can usually sense a creature automatically with an imprecise sense, unless it's using stealth or in an environment that distorts the sense, such as a noisy room or in the case of hearing. Such as a noisy room in the case of hearing. In those cases, you have to use the seek action to detect the creature. At best, an imprecise sense can give a creature the sensed condition. It can't make the creature seen. Alright. Pausing here. Again, we see that there's a rule for everything in Pathfinder. You may like that. You may like that. Here we have micromanaged and given about 4 different terms and several mechanics to interact with those terms for the simple act of looking around or trying to hear something. Does this seem convoluted? Is it too complex? Is this something that you would just choose to ignore? Because why do you need 4 different vocabulary words to describe perception? Ask yourself these questions. Look, if you're going to go and buy a car, you should ask yourself, why do I want this car? Why do I want the features this car has? Why do I want a new car instead of a used car? Or the other way around? Don't feel uncomfortable like you're insulting the people who have written this book by saying, is it too much that suddenly we have to memorize not just how to use the senses, but also which subtle conditions are applied between the condition of being sensed or the condition of being seen. And then all of the rules and penalties and bonuses, of which to perceive in this edition, there are 9 variables you have to check before you can even sense something, let alone see something, with a precise or an imprecise sense that your GM has to consider, because perception is stratified among several columns of verbiage. And here we have the scent ability, which then turns an imprecise sense of smell into a precise sense. So now there are conditions for overcoming the static rules that involve more vocabulary on a conditional basis among every creature inside the bestiary. While a human might have a difficult time making out creatures in dim light, an elf can see those creatures just fine. And though elves have no problem seeing on a moonlit night, their vision cannot penetrate complete darkness, whereas a dwarf's can. Special senses grant greater awareness that allows creatures with those senses to either ignore or reduce the effects of Alright, here's 3 conditions. Unseen, sensed, or concealed. To then make it into the 4th term of seen. Now, this is also something mechanically for you, more as a GM than as a PC. Because there are 3 strata of vision, if you have adventurers that are exploring a dungeon, a cave, an old boarded up haunted house, they're walking through a moonlit forest, and you have a human, an elf, and a dwarf, you are either going to be explaining the same event or the same scene 3 different ways to 3 different people sitting at the same table who can all hear the best description, that of the dwarf with dark vision, thereby rendering low light vision and whatever, if you want to call it bright light vision or just no special sense, thereby rendering those traits completely useless, and you as a GM are completely narrating to the one character that has that special sense, and therefore trusting that that character, you know, speaking through that character's mouth, that character would even give all the details that you've presented, or given those details in the same way that you presented them to the dwarf. D&D has somewhat done away with that. In 5th edition, they have just whatever, normal vision, and then they have dark vision. And 90% of, well, I mean, even higher, only Drow have 120 feet of dark vision. Everyone else has 60. I personally think dark vision is, it can slow the game down, and it's thematic, but you do run into this problem. I don't know, dark vision, I'm not against it, but if it was removed from the races, I think that we would have a better experience playing. In my opinion. IMHO, in my humble opinion. But here we have in Pathfinder, if in a multi ancestry, because they don't use race, they call it ancestry. In a multi ancestry party, you are now describing this, you're filtering, or you're making the other players at the table irrelevant because you're only speaking to the dwarf, who can see everything clearly because he has the best eyesight. D-Floof, hey! Or should I say Orc? Thank you very much for that raid. Welcome, Orc. Azal, thanks for coming along on the raid, too. Dark Wolf said, the only issue I ever had was occasionally not being able to read some text on stream, but that's due to me using multi-window and having your stream smaller than usual. Well, if any of you are watching on mobile and there are improvements I can make here or there, let me know, please. Your experience is what I'm concerned with, which is actually the point of me kind of getting into a tizzy about some of the details here that we're going over. Blind sense is an imprecise sense with which a creature can detect things it can't see out to a specified range. Every version of blind sense uses a particular non-visual sense. A dragon might use its exceptional scent to smell intruders, while an undead might detect a creature's life force or hear heartbeats. Against a creature taking precautions to avoid visual detection, a creature with blind sense treats sensed creatures as if they were concealed, and treats unseen creatures as if they were sensed. This applies only within range of the creature's blind sense. Yep, no problem, Floof. Thank you for the raid. Thank you for stopping by and saying hi. For you and anyone else who came over with you, it's always appreciated. It's great to have you here. D-Floof, a.k.a. Orc. Blind sight is a precise sense other than vision, such as echolocation, that a creature can use to perceive details in the same way a human uses vision, out to a specified range. As with blind sense, every version of blind sight is a particular non-visual sense. I'll come up to this sidebar in a second here. Dark vision. A creature with dark vision can see perfectly well in areas of darkness and dim light, though such vision is in black and white only. Some forms of magical darkness, such as a 4th level darkness spell, block dark vision. However, a creature with greater dark vision can see through even these forms of magical darkness. Low light vision. A creature with low light vision does not treat creatures or objects within dim light as concealed. Scent involves sensing creatures or objects by smell. It's an imprecise sense within range, etc. so forth. Tremor sense. You can feel your Toph from Avatar, The Last Airbender. There are 4 states that measure the degree to which you can sense a creature. Seen, concealed, sensed, and unseen. When you're trying to target a creature, that's harder to see or otherwise sense, various drawbacks apply. Most of these rules apply to objects you're trying to detect as well as creatures. Typically, the GM tracks how well creatures can detect one another, since neither party has perfect information. For example, you might think a creature is in the last place you sensed it, but was actually able to sneak away. Or you might think that a creature can't see you in the darkness. Hey, Tracy, good to see you. Rawr. Rawr. I think it was, I don't know if Oni-chan is still in the group here. I don't see Oni-chan the Weeb Hunter offhand here. But I think it was he that made the point last night. McGee, thank you very much for the follow. I hope you're enjoying the content. Have a seat. You're at a table at a game store. We're having a good conversation, talking about mechanics, philosophy, business, interpersonal communication. I'm just handing out associate's degrees while we're going over this playtest. Where a lot of the rules that are presented here would make for an excellent video game engine. And I don't disagree. There just seems to be a lot for a person to keep track of if they're to play with all of the tools that Pathfinder gives you, which is a lot of tools. And so here we get into the nitty-gritty of what each of the 4 conditions of being sensed mean and do. The stealth skill is designed to use hide for avoiding visual detection and sneak to avoid being heard. For many special senses, a player can describe how they're avoiding detection by a special sense and use the most applicable stealth action. For instance, a creature stepping lightly to avoid being detected via tremor sense would be using sneak. A character using stealth in this way overrides the usual rules by which special senses detect creatures. So on and so forth. This guy's throwing up the Elder sign. Oh, snap, Coffee. A water main busted down the road from your house and your water is off. Hopefully not for too long. Do they have, yeah, I hope that doesn't last too long. Do they have some kind of, like, I don't know, are they providing bottled water to people? Or is it expected to be fixed within an hour? Or what, I hope that they can resolve that quickly, Coffee Cat. Okay, and then, of course, there's being invisible as per the spell or the magic item. Oh, it's been down all day. Oh. You just checked a bit ago? Oh, my. Like, I don't know, do you have to... Is there, like, a shelter, or... Are they handing out bottles of water or gallons of water so that you can, like, refill a toilet tank or something? Or a place to go if you want to cook food or take a shower or something like that? When every action counts, you enter the encounter mode of play. Your turns, yeah, okay, so that's a 6-second turns. Every round is 6 seconds at a time in the game world. Step 1, roll initiative. When the GM calls for it, you roll initiative to determine your place in the initiative order, which is the sequence in which the characters will take their turns. This roll marks the start of an encounter. More often than not, you'll roll initiative when you enter a battle, which is often called a combat encounter. As a default assumption, these rules are written for that type of encounter. Not sure, you just called the city and that's what they told you. Well, if you have any community centers around you, I don't know, like a YMCA, or if it's not, private or public, or, some civic groups, like Rotary, Kiwanis, Lions Club, or even religious groups, various churches and whatnot, might be handing out water or have facilities that are functioning in some other way that if you need to use them, you might be able to. I understand, Coffee. Well, I really do hope that they get that fixed very quickly. It's something that a lot of us might take for granted, is having instant potable water on tap. Just, we can summon water at any point in time for our purposes. And suddenly, when that simple part of life, or that just this aspect of life is gone, it suddenly throws a lot of things into a different perspective, doesn't it? It's not like zombie survival apocalypse, but it does have you wonder, well, I do have stuff to eat, or I do need to, perform metabolic functions of the body, and I rely on water to help keep me clean and to help keep things going, Yep. Typically, you'll roll a perception check to determine your initiative. The more aware you are of your surroundings, the more quickly you can respond. Sometimes the GM might call on you to make some other type of check for the initiative check. For instance, if you were sneaking during exploration, you'd roll a stealth check instead. Alternatively, a social encounter could call for a deception or diplomacy check. If you're about to start a wrestling match, the GM might ask how you want to play the opening move in the competition and decide based on your answer that your initiative roll should be an athletics or acrobatics check. The GM rolls initiative for any potential adversaries in the encounter. If the potential adversaries include a number of identical creatures, she could roll once for the group as a whole and have them take their turns within the group in any order she wishes. She could even change the initiative order within the group from round to round. The GM could also roll any or all creatures individually. Unlike a typical check, initiative rolls are ranked instead of being compared to a DC. This ranking sets the initiative order in which the encounter's participants act. Yeah, so, highest to lowest. If your initiative roll result is tied with an opponent's result, that opponent goes first. If your initiative roll result is tied with another player character's result, you can decide between yourselves who goes first. And that's something that a lot of people may do differently in 5th Ed. 5th edition D&D, it says that if you have players that are tied, you just decide who goes first. Though there are many players or even DMs who say, well, who has the higher initiative bonus? And or who has the higher dex bonus? Or something along those lines. When technically rules as written says you just decide, and then monsters that are tied go after the PCs in whatever order the PCs have decided. 2, play a round. The round begins when the participants with the highest initiative roll start their turn. It ends with the lowest initiative ends their turn. The process of taking turn is detailed below. Then you begin the next round. You end the encounter upon X condition. So when it's your turn to act, you can use actions, which is this solid symbol here. You can use free actions, which is this hollow symbol, and reactions. When you're finished, your turn ends, and the character next in the initiative order begins. Let's see. Many things happen automatically at the start of your turn, and so it's a common point for tracking the passage of time for effects that last multiple rounds. Take the following steps, plus do anything else that is specified to happen at the start of your turn in any order you choose. Untap, upkeep, draw... No, I'm sorry, that's magic. If you created an effect that lasts for a certain number of rounds, you reduce the number of rounds remaining. The effect ends if the duration has expired. For example, if you cast a spell on yourself that lasts 3 rounds on your first turn of a fight, it would affect you during that turn, decrease to 2 rounds of duration at the start of your second, decrease to 1 at the start of your third, and expire at the start of your fourth. You can use free actions or reactions that have a trigger of your turn begins, or something similar. If you're dying or unconscious, attempt your recovery saving throw. The last step of starting your turn is always the same. Regain your 3 actions and 1 reaction. If you have not spent your actions or your reaction from your last turn, you lose them. You can't hold over actions or reactions from one turn to another. Some abilities or conditions, such as the quick and slowed conditions, can change how many actions you regain and whether you regain your reaction. If a condition prevents you from being able to act, you don't regain any actions or your reactions. So this is saying that you cannot hold your turn, either to rearrange initiative, or it sounds like you cannot hold an attack for a circumstance of some kind. Yes. So that is called, moving is called stride. And striding takes one of your 3 actions that you get. So then after the start of your turn, you get to act. You spend your actions in any order you wish during your turn. What actions you can use often depend on your skills, feats, and items, but there are a number of default actions you can take described under basic actions on 307. Some effects will prevent you from acting. If you can't act, you can't use actions, activities, reactions, or free actions. You have to spend, if it says that, if you cast a spell, it takes 3 actions to cast, you have to spend all 3 on that turn. You can't hold over portions of actions to another turn. Multiple attack penalty. Attacks are particularly strenuous and become less and less effective the more you use them in a single turn. Pardon. The second time you use an attack during your turn, you take a -5 penalty to your attack roll. On your third attack and any subsequent ones, you take a -10. This penalty is called your multiple attack penalty. The multiple attack penalty applies only on your turn and resets at the end of your turn. Attacks you can make outside of your turn might include their own penalties. Activities and encounters. Activities that take longer than a turn can't normally be performed during an encounter. So yeah, that's like spells with a casting time of a minute, etc. Your reactions let you respond to what's happening around you immediately. The GM determines whether you can use reactions before your first turn begins, depending on the situation in which the encounter happens. And it looks like that is... And we'll get to an attack of opportunity, because that works differently in Pathfinder now. That is correct, Coffee Cat. Because you only get 3 actions normally. If a spell costs 3 actions to cast, you can't use any of your actions to stride or strike or do anything else. Oh, I'm sorry, that you can change the initiative order here, huh? In 5th, you cannot. Any method used to track the initiative order needs to be flexible, because the order can change during the encounter. A creature can delay, A creature can delay to change its place in the order, in which case you can erase it from the list or pull its marker aside until it re-enters the initiative order. It can ready to use an action that's activated by a trigger, but that does not change its place in the order. When a creature gets knocked out, its initiative order changes automatically. Actually here, we're coming up to it here. Yeah, you hold your action and then you use it as a reaction when the condition you set forth presents itself. 2 of the simplest actions you'll commonly use during your turn are stride and strike. Stride is an action with the move trait that allows you to move up to your speed in feet. You'll often need to stride multiple times to reach a foe who's far away or to run from danger! Reactions in the game are often triggered by move actions. Unlike other actions, however, a move action can trigger reactions and free actions not only when you start, but also every 5 feet you move during that action or reaction. The step action lets you move 5 feet without triggering reactions. Or in 3rd edition, we call that the 5-foot step. Strike is an action with the attack trait that allows you to attack with a weapon you're wielding or an unarmed attack, such as with a fist. You have to attack a creature within your reach if you're using a melee weapon or unarmed attack, or a creature within range if you're attacking with a ranged weapon. Your reach is how far you can physically extend a part of your body to make an unarmed attack, or the farthest distance you can reach with a melee weapon. It's typically 5 feet, but special weapons and larger creatures have longer reaches. So yeah, you could feasibly take a triple move on your turn. You would spend all 3 of your actions to move. And so here's an example. Triggering moves. Valeros can approach position 1 with the stride action without triggering reactions. So right here. If Valeros approaches this way to position 2, he triggers reactions from both the Hobgoblin and the Troll. So here's the Hobgoblin right here, and the Troll is the big guy up here. The Troll has a reach of 10 feet, so Valeros triggers reactions from both enemies when he moves out of the 2nd square into the 3rd. And you can see that, there's the star indicating something happens. If Senoi strides to position 3, she triggers reactions from the Hobgoblin and the Troll. Because of its 10-foot reach, the Troll could use its reaction when Sione left either square. She could step twice to get there to avoid triggering reactions, but that uses 2 actions instead of 1. So she could take 2 5-foot steps that avoid... It's like a disengage style action. Some reactions are specifically meant to be used in combat and can change how the battle plays out drastically. One example of a reaction is Attack of Opportunity, which fighters receive at 1st level. Fighters receive. So, an Attack of Opportunity is sort of an always-on option in 5th Ed. However, it is contained to fighters in Pathfinder. That doesn't mean there are not other similar styles of reactions, but a specific, as we call it, an Attack of Opportunity, is a feature of a fighter. Do enemies get attacks of opportunity for a player stepping into their reach? Hopefully, did this explain it for you, Coffee Cat? So, for instance, here's Valeros, right? If he approaches this way to position 2, he would get an attack of opportunity because he entered the threatened square of the Hobgoblin at the red star. As he's continuing to move through a threatened square of the Hobgoblin, it can strike at him if it has that ability. Because the Troll has a 10-foot reach, right? This red star is where he would enter a threatened square of the Troll. And thereby, moving through threatened squares to position 2, both the Hobgoblin and the Troll can take, if they have such a reaction, can take something similar to an attack of opportunity on Valeros. Now, in 5th Ed, you can you can run around all day long, and you can dance, and you can have all sorts of fun positioning, which Coffee Cat is why they removed flanking from the base rules, because in replacement of flanking, they give you a lot more combat mobility and to be able to dance around a target. So long as you aren't leaving a threatened square, then you can just keep orbiting a monster as much as you want. Alright, so if you're a fighter and you have the ability to make an attack of opportunity, a creature within your reach uses a manipulate action or a move action, makes a ranged attack, or leaves a square during a move action it's using. Make a melee strike against the triggering creature at a -2 penalty. If the attack hits and the trigger was a manipulate action, you disrupt that action. This strike doesn't count toward your multiple attack penalty, and your multiple attack penalty doesn't apply to it. This reaction allows you to make a melee strike if a creature within reach uses a manipulate, uses move... redundant. Okay. And then I like... you like flanking as an optional rule, but I understand that other stuff gives players advantage. Yeah, and you know what? Hey, when I first when I first started doing 5th, I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna move into flank. And we're like, okay, cool. So what are the rules for flank? Do you get advantage? Oh, there is no flanking. But there was flanking in like every other edition except 5th. But you know, if you're a rogue and you need to get in sneak attack, it's actually a lot easier for you now to do so, because you don't have to flank. You just have to have someone else adjacent. Even on a ranged attack, by the way. So step 3 into your turn. Once you've done all the things you want to do with your actions, you reach the end of your turn. Take the following steps, plus resolve anything else specified to happen at the end of your turn. In any order you choose. You then pass play to the next character. End effects, you know, persistent damage, etc. Okay. Lots of different basic actions. You can aid as a reaction. An ally is about to use an action, activity, free action, or reaction that requires a skill check. Then you can give them a circumstance bonus. Yeah, that's fine, Coffee Cat. It's interesting that you're going a College of Lore melee bard, as intrinsically a College of Valor bard is made to be a frontline bard. I'm not saying that you playing a frontline lore bard is bad at all. I actually like that you're playing a lore bard as a duelist, or as as someone who's not afraid to get up in the mix, instead of just sort of sitting back and strumming on a ukulele or something else, going la la la, casting spells, because not that that's bad. That's what the bards are meant to do. So challenging these conceptions. Okay, so there's just a lot of things that you can do that are basic actions. Remember, if you see this symbol next to it, it takes one of your 3 actions on your turn to complete. Requirements, you have to be prone and your speed is at least 10 feet. You move 5 feet. So if you're crawling, you can move 15 feet if you use all your actions. Now, this is where I get into... Pathfinder sure does break every single possible thing down into a mechanic and assign it vocabulary, assign it verbiage, assign it a specific use, as compared to something a little more rules light or freeform. Dropping prone takes an action, interacting with things. So, do I have to go through all of these? Just know that, look, if you want to do something in this system, it is going to have a rule associated with it. It's going to have a specific mechanic and a specific way for you to interact with that mechanic that will consume your action budget, right? Because we talk about economy of action, or action economy. Everything has a budget and everything has a cost. So really, a lot of the Pathfinder interaction are continual currency exchanges It's a big mercantile process going back and forth. You are buying your actions with the currency that's made available to you every turn. And so you have to be a wise shopper and try and find the best deal you can among, but it's like saying, well, I want something to eat, and then you go to your local super Walmart or some other, big giganto store that takes up several acres of land. And you say, well, I was really hungry. What do I want? Well, there's 10,000 things that you can get. Pathfinder is very crunchy. Pathfinder has a rule for everything, has a reference for everything, has a slot to fill every single possible circumstance, I presume. Is that good or bad? It is what it is. If you love crunch, if you love minutia, if you love the challenge of finding some best possible practice or path, or if you love building a super specialist character in some way, and I'm not saying that in a disparaging fashion. A lot of people might love this crunchy challenge. Then Pathfinder is certainly the game for you. Because everything is dictated, everything is mechanical, everything has a slot in a space, and it's a gear against which you grind against another gear, and suddenly all the gears begin turning, and you have a working machine. It seems like an OCD game to you? Well, in my biased opinion, and also with the caveat that this is a playtest, I would not have as much fun playing this game, because I wouldn't feel like I'm playing a game. I would feel like I am accounting. I would feel like I'm trying to balance a profit and loss statement. I feel like I would be trying to do a balance sheet. I feel like I would be playing, as someone put it yesterday, it would be a spreadsheet simulator. That's my opinion and my bias and my experience. Some of you out there might say, Matt, you're full of it. I'm done. Unsubscribe, unfollow, unfriended, whatever, and that's fine. Some of you might be like, yeah, you're onto something. But you know what? Even if we might not play this game after it's officially released, we're still challenging ourselves to think of something differently. We're getting out of our comfort zone. And we're seeing what else is out there. Because you know what? Something I really like about this Pathfinder system is that is the alternate critical. You don't have to roll a 20 or a 1. If you get 10 above something or 10 below something, I think as a general rule that's fine. I might even institute that in my personal game or even our Tuesday game. Though Coffee Cat, I haven't yet, so don't don't account for it. Neo Realms is so out of here. Hey, Neo. Oh, jeez. Coffee Cat, the opposite being Dungeon World or Apocalypse World, which you just tell the DM what you want to do, then you roll 2d6 plus a stat, which has almost no real rules for what stat to use for what. DC for all checks is the same. You do like Pathfinder? Your friend Chris writes for them, and I want to make sure that I am coming across as real and using tact. I don't have anything against a more complicated system like Pathfinder. It has a niche, and there are definitely people who like the complexity and with that, the mechanical depth that Pathfinder goes to. So this is, you know, it has its own lore. It has its whole world. It's a venerable product by now because it's been around. As we're going through it, Neo, as someone who hasn't played First Edition and who's probably been spoiled by 5th Edition, because I have been making my biases known, and I have been reminding everyone that this is also just a playtest. I just find that this is very... because there's minutia for everything. There's so much to keep track of. And it does turn into an accounting minigame when all I want to do is play a character. All I want to do is have fun. I don't want to have to balance 9 variables to roll a perception stat. This is my opinion. My opinion. And all of you out there are welcome to have an alternate one if you'd like. Thank you, Neo Realms. Seraph, hey, super sexy DM. How's your sage knowledge going today on All Us Mortals? Well, we are continuing to get through the playtest of 2nd Edition Pathfinder. And we're comparing and contrasting it to D&D, other role-playing games. We're looking back against even other types of role-playing games that aren't just fantasy-based. Smooth like butter. Coffee Cat, I like freedom DMing, mostly because stopping the narrative to look up a rule. And you know what? I think we would encounter a lot of that with this system, Coffee Cat. Because there's so many rules for a PC, let alone for a GM to have to remember. My big concern... You have to remember your favorite D&D is 2nd Edition. Yeah. Oh no, I remember I remember Neo Realms. In fact, I haven't because I haven't played 2nd Ed. But I think we have had people call back to mechanics in there as well. D&M's cut your teeth on. My big concern as a role player, and especially as someone who owns a store in which I will be selling these books. And I have to make sure that even though I have a personal bias, I need to be able to answer someone honestly. If they come up to me and they say, Matt, why would I want to play Pathfinder over D&D? And not just give them some, you know, used car salesman, you know, tap the hood. Oh, this baby right here, this will take you where you want to go. You know, and just give them a blow off or a canned answer, or be like, look, can you just buy the book because I want to make a sale? That is disingenuous and unprofessional. And so my challenge is when I'm faced with a product that, you know, I may never play. How do I give an honest response to someone who says, why should I buy this book from you? Why should I spend $50 on a rule book? I like role-playing games over spreadsheet accounting games, but it's nice to learn a new system. Yes, Seraph, because you know what? This system has actually made me consider some things that we can do to 5th Edition to tweak it a little bit and have some fun. 5th is good for freedom. Yes, Coffee Cat. Neo Realms, I didn't catch something tonight. It's because we're uploading too much stuff. Oh, gotcha. By the way, everyone, in Neo Realms, if you want to put a link up to your channel... Everyone, Neo Realms is primarily a creative artist here in the Twitch community, and actually makes artwork for games. If I recall correctly, Neo Realms, your latest project, you're making a bunch of art for a board game, a sci-fi themed board game, if I recall correctly, yeah? But Neo, if you want to put a link up to your channel, I would urge you all. Neo Realms is awesome to talk to. He has fun little mini games that you can play in his channel that he has animated also. I'm kind of jealous, actually. But give Neo Realms a look. Talk to him. Have some fun in his channel. He's an awesome dude. Hey, Technotron. Technotron, I glimpsed at my page, and I saw you were playing Enter the Gungeon earlier, weren't you? I hope you had fun doing that. You like looking at other systems to find things? Yeah, exactly, Coffee Cat. Yep, tweaking it for your personal games. Yeah, you use flanking. Yeah, exactly. And look, as with anything in life, if you don't challenge yourself to get out of your comfort zone and to consider something different, even if it's grating, can you truly say that you support where you were before? Before you take a seat, you have to know where you stand. And so you have to challenge yourself. Is it a matter of personal faith or spiritual faith? Is it a matter of something a philosophical or a political concern? Challenge yourself. Open yourself up to other ideas. Even if you come back and you reject your thought experiment, or you give something a try. Normally, normally you order tea at a restaurant, but you know what? Today I'm gonna try not their normal black tea. I'm gonna try their green tea. You know, it's a sidestep, but it's different. And you take a sip of that tea and you're like, oh, this is disgusting. Human beings consume this? You still, if you gave it an honest try, and you're the only one who knows if you did or not, and you go back to drinking black tea, you are way more comfortable knowing that I am a black tea drinker, because I actually tried drinking other teas. I challenged myself, I opened myself up, and now I'm a better person for it. So as much as I might, look at this and say there are 9 variables to consider when making a perception check. 9. 9, 9, 9. We are trying something new, and whether we accept all, some, or none of what is in Pathfinder, we are going to be better people for it. We're going to be better role players, better PCs, and better GMs, because we have stepped outside our comfort zones and we're challenging ourselves to try and open up to these other methodologies. And so, to get what I was saying, if someone came into my store and said, Matt, why should I buy Pathfinder Second Edition from you? I mean, whether or not they know that I probably won't play this game personally. And I would tell them, if you love character customization, if you love mechanics, if you love like fine-tuning and tweaking and building very like super specialized characters, if you love crunch, then this is the game for you. You can build such a fine, like monomolecular blade edge honed character. You can't do that in D&D. I mean, not by the rules as written or presented in the rule book. And that would be my sales pitch, at least so far as I've understood Pathfinder here. Because, you can reference anything. There's a rule for everything in this system. You could build 100 fighters who are all going to be doing different things in different ways. It gives you options, and it can provide mechanical depth that D&D would not normally. King has finally found the sweet release of death, except for the fact that King is a lich, and I doubt a simple bullet would actually do much of anything. Especially because a bullet is piercing damage and not bludgeoning. You played a really good role-playing game? Oh, yeah. Yes, this is just the player's handbook. Well, it's also... There is game mastering, this next section coming up. So anyway, so we come here. Here are all of the things that you can do. All of the things that you can do on your turn. There's minutia for it. There's crunch for everything you want to do. It is all written out here. There you go. Do you want to take a deep breath? There's an action for it. You want to burrow? Do you want to point something out? There you go. You can point something out, and there is a mechanic for pointing something out. Alright, so different movement types. Some abilities give you different ways to move, such as through the air or underground. Each of these special movement types has its own speed value. Many creatures have these speeds naturally. The various types of movement are listed below. Since the stride action can be used only with your normal speed, moving using one of the movement types requires using a special action, and you can't step while using one of these movement types. So stepping and striding are different. A step is a 5-foot step if you're familiar with 3rd edition vernacular. Switching from one movement type to another requires ending your movement in the first type and using a new action in the second. For instance, if you climb 10 feet to the top of a cliff, you could then stride forward 10 feet. Burrowing, climbing, flying, swimming, falling. When you fall more than 5 feet, you take bludgeoning damage, which this is something D&D is like, oh yeah, you fall 200 feet, that's like, what, 10d6 damage? or something? I mean, I'm being a little sarcastic there. D&D, I don't think, treats falling with the level of lethality that I think falling should actually impose, in my opinion. So this is saying when you fall more than 5 feet, you take bludgeoning damage, and when you land equal to half the distance you fell, or no, when you land equal to half the distance you fell. Treat falls longer than 1,500 feet as though they were 1,500 feet, or 750 damage. If you take any damage from a fall, you're knocked prone when you land. You can grab an edge as a reaction using the acrobatics skill to reduce the damage from some falls. In addition, if you fall into water, snow, or another relatively soft substance, you can treat the fall as though it were 20 feet shorter, or 30 feet shorter if you intentionally dove in. The effectiveness reduction... Depending on how high you fall, water might as well be concrete, my friends. I know we're discussing fantasy and whatnot, but seriously, if you jump out of a plane, I know for 1,500 feet it's not going to make a big difference, but depending on how far you actually fall, like, it'll shatter your legs when you hit the water. King says it's your AT field people have to whittle down before they can actually end any sort of narrative-changing blow, and there's only one kind of narrative-changing blow: unconsciousness or death. Falling and fire in D&D are like minor nuisances. Yes. Yep, falling and fire in D&D are minor nuisances. I would agree there, King. For me, that would be a chunky salsa type situation. Point-blank shots from firearms pointed at one's head. That's an insta-kill. Same with falling far enough. It's cool. You don't need your legs that much. Well, that's good, because they'd be kind of like compressed up into your torso. Or they'd just be akimbo because you've just pulverized your leg bones into 100 pieces. Falling on a creature. If you land on a creature, that creature must attempt a reflex save. On a success, it takes bludgeoning damage equal to 1/4 of the falling damage you took. On a critical success, it takes no damage. On a failure, it takes bludgeoning damage equal to half the falling damage you took. And on a critical failure, it takes the same amount of falling damage you took. Could you argue for more? If I fall 100 feet, I'm hitting you as hard as I'm hitting the ground, right? Would you only take half damage? If I sandwich you between a dive off of a cliff and a concrete, or like a canyon floor below, could you live where I would die? Yeah, level 1, anyone on fire. Oh, dear God. Level 10 person on fire. Yeah. Oh, it's that stuff again? Falling objects. Dropped object takes damage just like a falling creature if it lands on a creature, etc. so forth. Alright. Forced movement. When an effect forces you to move, or if you start falling, that movement is defined by the effect that moved you, not by your speed. Because you're not acting to move, this doesn't trigger reactions that are triggered by movement. Which, for those of you who are joining us, we do go back to the old, 3rd edition D&D, where here, Valeros, if he moves to the red star, he is now in the threatened square of the hobgoblin, and the threatened square of the troll who has reach. And so, therefore, if he goes to position 2... he will prompt some kind of reaction, if it's available, from the hobgoblin and the troll, because he's moving through threatened squares. Something that 5th edition has done away with. Also to note, attack of opportunity is a fighter-only feat. Now, there are similar reactions, I'm sure, that different classes might be able to take. But in terms of, I'm going to take an AO as a wizard and bonk someone with my staff. No. You do not get that as a basic rule. Is that good or bad? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what I don't know. Alright, so we are falling. Your movement during encounter mode depends on the actions and other abilities you use. Whether you stride or step, swim or climb, the maximum distance you can move is based on your speed. Certain feats or magic items can grant you other movement types, allowing you to swiftly burrow, climb, fly, or swim. When the rules refer to a movement cost or spending movement, they are referring to how many feet of your speed it costs to move from one point to another. Normally, movement costs 5 feet per square when you're moving on a battle grid, or it costs a number of feet if you move you're not using a battle grid. However, sometimes it's harder to move a certain distance due to difficult terrain or other factors. Grid movement. If an encounter involves combat, it's often a good idea to track the movement in a relative position using a Pathfinder brand flip map, or some other form of grid to display the terrain, and miniatures to represent the combatants. When a character moves on a grid, every 1-inch square of the play area is 5 feet across in the game world. Hence, a creature moving in a straight line spends 5 feet of its movement for every square traveled. Because moving through spaces on a diagonal covers more ground, you count that movement differently. The first square of diagonal movement you make in a turn counts as 5 feet, the second counts as 10, and your count alternates between the two. For example, as you move across 4 squares diagonally, you would count 5 feet, 10, 5 feet, 10 for a total of 30 feet. You need to track your total diagonal movement across all your movement during your turn, but you reset your count at the end of your turn. This is how 3rd edition used to be, until 4th edition said, let's make this simpler, and 5th edition said, yeah, let's. Although 5th edition does give you the option, you don't have to play in a grid in 5th edition. It explicitly, you can go back to hypotenuse tracking and this other stuff. But, as the rules, even though it is grid-based, it is saying that you go 5-10, 5-10. Although, actually, hang on a second. What is this? 313? I want to see something here. These... Okay, so now we're going to go through spells. Because I want to check something out here. Were they consistent with that for movement as for casting spells? I mean, I imagine they were. Give me just a moment here. What I'm looking for is they actually had a grid. They actually had a grid illustration to show things like bursts around you and distances for rays and things along those lines. I don't know where that got off to then. Here we go. Okay, so it looks like they were consistent, and which is good, right? So a 30-foot line is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in a straight line, or in a diagonal. This is a 30-foot line because you have 5, 10 for 15, 5, 10 for 15 here, and then here's a slightly less diagonal. So 5, 10, 15, 20, and your second diagonal is 30. Or 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 for an even slightly less diagonal. Okay. All right, so yes, bear that in mind, that this does maintain the 5-10, 5-10 diagonal rule. Grid movement, okay. Move triggers. Some reactions and free actions are triggered by a creature using an action or ability with the move trait. The most common is Attack of Opportunity, which allows a creature to strike a moving foe. Actions or abilities with the move trait can trigger reactions or free actions throughout the course of the distance traveled. Each time you exit a square or move 5 feet if you aren't using a grid to track movement, that is within a creature's reach, your movement triggers those reactions and free actions. If you use a move action or move ability but don't move into another square, the trigger happens and at the end of that action or ability instead. Some exceptions, such as step, don't trigger. That's the 5-foot step. Yes, Coffee Cat. And unless you all just decide, look, we don't care about the 5-10 rule, we're just going to count a square as a square, then that's fine. I find it's convenient. I don't care that fireballs are square on a grid. I don't mind that it's easy. It keeps the game flowing. It makes things easier to produce instead of now having to do, you know, instead of having to calculate the hypotenuse and all this other stuff, you know, or accidentally or purposely cheesing movement on a diagonal, or you know, calculating your cone of magic or something along those lines. Exactly. I'd prefer to keep the game going. A square is a square, and you know what? Just because it's a rule in the rule book here doesn't mean you have to follow it. So you could make a homebrew rule that says, no, we're going to run this simpler. I don't care. A square is a square. You can move through a willing creature's space. If you want to move through an unwilling creature's space, you have to either attempt an athletics check to shove it out of the way or tumble through it. By the way, these are capital S's, or capital S, capital T, and T. So these are the names of abilities. You can't end your movement at square occupied by another creature, though you can end a move action in its square, provided you immediately use another move action to leave that square. If two creatures end up in the same square by accident, the GM determines which one is forced out of the square or falls prone. Prone and incapacitated creatures. You can share a space with a prone creature if that creature is willing, unconscious, or dead, and is your size or smaller. The GM might allow you to climb atop the corpse of an unconscious body of a larger creature in some situations. A prone creature can't stand up while someone else occupies its space, but it can crawl to a space where it's able to stand, or it can attempt to shove the creature out of the way. Capital C crawl, capital S shove, these are all mechanics that have their own set of circumstances for you to engage if you're in this condition. Not following the rules, inciting the gods of chaos, that's like spitting in the eye of an RNG god. That is true, Seraph. Coffee Cat, can you split up your total movement and only spend one action? You spend your action and then you move on to your next action. So, unlike in 5th edition, where if you have 30 feet of movement, you can move 10, fire an arrow, move 20. You have to complete your actions in turn. Now, your actions can go in any order, but you can only do one action after another action, etc. Creatures of different sizes. In most cases, you can move through the space of a creature at least 3 sizes larger than you. This means a medium creature can move through the space of a gargantuan creature, and a small creature can move through the space of a huge creature. Likewise, a bigger creature can move through the space of a creature 3 sizes smaller itself or smaller. You still can't end your movement on a space occupied by a significantly larger or smaller creature. Tiny creatures are an exception. They can move through any creature's spaces and can even end their movement there. See page 313 for more. So here's an example. Linny, who is a gnome druid, Linny decides to stride. She has a speed of 20 feet. She moves straight south, spending 5 feet of her speed, then diagonally spending another 5. Her next diagonal move, because it's her second diagonal of the turn, costs her 10 feet of movement. She spent all 20 feet of her speed and ends that stride. She seeks, and something catches her eye to the northeast, so she decides to move toward it. However, the crumbled stone is difficult terrain, so each square costs 5 more feet of speed. She moves diagonally, spending 10 feet of movement since this is an odd-numbered diagonal, and she wants to move northeast again, but that would cost her 15 feet. 10 feet for an even-numbered diagonal, and 5 more for being difficult terrain. Instead, she decides to move directly north. This cost her 10 feet, and she's used all 20 feet of her speed. So there you go. On its face, is this terribly complex? Not necessarily. Is this one more thing that you have to balance and measure in your economy of action as you're spending your currency of actions amid all of the other DCs and available movements and available actions and available feats and spells? At this point, what is really the straw that's going to break the camel's back? I don't know if there's really going to be one. Again, what we're dealing with here is what's called the heap paradox. And the heat paradox, in recap, is if I take a salt shaker and I add 1 grain of salt at a time, like I just drop a grain on a table, is that a heap? What about 2? Is 100 grains of salt a heap of salt? What about 1,000? Or let's say I dump out half of the salt shaker on the table. Would you agree with me that that's a heap of salt? And we counted every grain and we said, okay, 50,000 grains of salt is a heap. Is 49,999 grains of salt a heap? 49,990? We're just going to skip that whole other 9. Is that still a heap? At which point does something become or not become a heap? And so we're kind of dealing, at this point in time, if we haven't bought into the fact that this is a very rules-heavy, mechanics-heavy, an accounting and a currency balancing economy of action game, then, I mean, we've made it this far. So this should not seem shocking nor surprising, nor is it especially complex. It's just one more thing to consider. It's one more grain of salt on the pile. Is a pile a heap? But again, if you have to stop and think like this in the middle of combat that already takes a long amount of time, are we enjoying a role-playing game, or are we random number generating, or we're spending 5 minutes to move 40 feet instead of just doing it? Some people like this. And you know, Neo, you said that you had a friend that writes for Pathfinder. And I've said this throughout the week we've been broadcasting. I have no personal grudge against the writers of this system. This is its own system. It has its own culture. It has its own expectations. For me and how I run my games, I would rather run a smoother game than have to sit down and figure the minutia of moving my character on a map, forward, backward, diagonal, etc. Especially because I'm already rolling and taking into consideration, if I seek, that uses a perception. And so, and a perception check in this edition has 9 variables that I have to check and balance and add up. So I've already spent time calculating my movement, and then I'm spending time calculating 9 variables to look here, and then I'm spending more time to then evaluate, of my 20 feet, how many diagonals have I taken before? Maybe I don't even remember. And then there's difficult terrain. Oh, he writes the novels? Okay. Fiction? Pure fiction? As a novel writer, he doesn't have to worry about a lot of this stuff. Because unless he's writing, you know, Linny scanned the area, considering everything that could be available to her. She then looked at the ground and noticed that a part of her diagonal movement to get to the item she sought was difficult terrain. Linny paused a moment, spending several minutes considering her next 20 feet of movement on open ground. Neo, you do like the rule-heavy stuff when I know it well. I imagine, yeah, if you spend time playing this and you get broken in and you can run a game efficiently and you could just tell people, okay, do this, this, this. Have you considered this? Or you have a lot of other notes and supplements. Yes. I could see that as well. I mean, it could be enjoyable, or, you know, people might say, well, I don't want to invest the time, but if Neo Realms over here knows the system, he's willing to help me out, and then, you know, Neo, give me a hand, because there's so much stuff here I don't want to think about. Can you just, you know, can you get me in on this? Your personal games are streamlined. Oh, gotcha, Neo. And what's the link? Difficult terrain is any terrain that impedes your movement. Moving into a square of difficult terrain. Movement you make while jumping ignores terrain you're jumping over. Some abilities. Okay, it's an extra 5 feet of movement. Okay. Moving into the square of difficult terrain, by the way. So it's 2 for 1. You gotta spend 10 feet of movement to move 5 feet in difficult. Hazardous terrain damages you when you move through it. For instance, an acid pool, a pit of burning embers, and a spike-filled passageway are all examples of hazardous terrain. Narrow surfaces. A narrow surface is so precariously thin that you need to balance or risk falling. Even on a success, you are flat-footed on a narrow surface. Each time you're hit by an attack or fail a save on a narrow surface, you need to maintain balance to avoid falling. There's also uneven ground and inclines. So each of these require a different ability and really a different mechanic under the umbrella of that ability. Flanking. So here we have Valeros and Kira are flanking the ogre because they draw a line to each other that passes through opposite sides of the ogre's space. The ogre is flat-footed to them, taking a -2 circumstance penalty to its AC. Meresiel isn't flanking the ogre because she can't draw a line to Valeros or Kira that passes through opposite sides of the ogre's space. And the ogre is not in Sione's reach. Sione's down here. The hobgoblin and ogre flank Sione since they can draw a line that passes through opposite sides of her space. If the ogre didn't have 10 feet of reach, the two monsters would not flank her. So Sione is being flanked here by the hobgoblin and by the ogre. And Kira and Valeros are flanking the ogre, but Meresiel is just kind of up here doing her own thing. Oh, it's his book. You spent today mapping trains for an upcoming quest. Ooh. Here, I'm gonna open this up. Thank you for sharing that link. Pathfinder Tales, Pirate's Honor. Oh, it's on Audible. Well, if it supports your friend, Neo Realms, I will pick up this book if it's going to give him some support, especially if it's on Audible. Oh my gosh, my Audible library. Yeah. That way I can listen to it while I'm working and doing some other things too. You'd rather watch characters interact and try and streamline the DM story. You did the covers to his humor books before he made a name for himself. That's really cool, Neo Realms. Well, hopefully then if I pick up this book, Pirate's Honor, hopefully he'll get some kind of like a commission or a royalty off of it. And when I finish it, I'll let you know how it goes. Because look, if I can, I want to do business with people who do business with me. Right? I want to help support you all in my stream because you're here helping to support me. You have a few writer friends you do not mention? Is that ellipses because it's like controversial or something? If you want to bring up writer friends, you're welcome to name drop in here, Neo. Oni-chan, though, hey, yeah, you know what? I just I invoked you earlier. I don't know if you were in the chat while I was doing so, Weeb Hunter, but I said last night I thought it was you that said that this rule system would make for an excellent programming for a video game, and I did invoke that sentiment again here tonight. Oh, they aren't all okay. All right, I got you, Neo Realms. Cover and screening. Valeros and the Ogre don't have cover from one another. The line from the center of Valeros' space to the center of the Ogre's space doesn't pass through, blocking terrain. The Ogre has cover from Merisiel. The line between the centers of their spaces crosses, blocking terrain. So here's Merisiel number 2. And it does clip through this corner of the house. Kyra can still see the Ogre, but it has cover from her because the line from the center of her space to the center of its space goes through, blocking terrain. It's also screened from her ranged attacks because the line from the most favorable corner of her space to the center of its space goes through, blocking terrain. So Kira is over here, right? Kira can see, right, from this corner, from the dotted line. So Kira can still see the edge of the token of the Ogre, but there's no it has cover because of the house or whatever, the walls. Sione doesn't have to worry about cover, but the Ogre is screened from Sione. There's an unblocked line between the centers of their spaces, but the line from the best corner of her space to the center of the Ogre's space passes through Valeros, making the Ogre screened. And so that's what that dotted line means. So there's not cover, but there is screening. Cover. When you're behind a wall or some other hard surface that could potentially block weapons or other effects, you're behind cover. If you're behind cover, you gain a +2 circumstance bonus to your AC, as well as to your reflex saving throws against area effects. You can increase this bonus to +4 by taking cover. That's a capital T, capital C. So it's an ability. It consumes an action or a reaction of some kind. A creature with cover can attempt to use stealth to conceal its presence with the hide action. To determine whether a target has cover from an attack, the attacking creature or object draws a line from the center of its space to the center of the target's space. If that line passes through any blocking terrain, the target is cover. Okay, and we went through that on the example. Screening. Or actually, let's go cover from large creatures. If a creature between you and the target is 2 or more sizes larger than both you and your target, that creature's entire space is considered blocking terrain for the purposes of determining cover. When you're attempting a ranged attack or a melee attack against a non-adjacent target, your target might be screened from you if another creature is between you. If you must attack or shoot through the space of a creature that's one size smaller than you or larger, your target is screened from you and gains a +1 circumstance bonus to AC against your attack. Unlike cover and the concealed condition, being screened doesn't allow the creature to attempt to hide. To determine whether your target is screened from your attack, pick the corner of your space with the least obstructed line to your target and draw a line to the center of the target's space. If you can't reach the center of the creature's space without passing through either blocking terrain or another creature that's one size smaller than you or larger, the target is screened against the attack. Mounted combat. When you're mounted during an encounter, the mount you control acts on your initiative. You must use the handle an animal and the command an animal actions to get your mount to spend its actions. If you don't, the animal wastes its actions. If you have the ride general feat, you can use the command an animal action without having to handle an animal first. For example, if you are mounted on a horse and you make 3 attacks, your horse would remain stationary since you didn't command it. If you instead spend your first action using the handle an animal action and succeed, then you could use the command an animal action to get it to move its speed. You could then spend your third action to either make an attack yourself or to command the horse to attack, but not both. You and your mount fight as a unit. Consequently, you share a multiple attack penalty. For example, if you strike and then command an animal to strike, your mount's attack takes a -5 multiple attack penalty. Chris asks, who will win? The world's greatest fantasy role-playing game or one copy boy? Well, Chris, to be determined. We've made some pretty good progress. Look, we're on page 314 of a 434-page playtest, and we're going through. We are considering what it has to offer. You know, we're treating it as its own species. For sure, by now, we have determined that D&D 5th edition is a more streamlined role-playing game. If that's not obvious by page 314, I don't know. But we have been comparing it to D&D 5th Ed and even other editions, because this edition of Pathfinder, with a slight sense of irony, has 4th edition D&D aspects to it. But we've also looked at Pathfinder First Edition, and we've talked about other role-playing games too, or our opinions on various systems or specific mechanics. And I'll tell you, Chris, there's a couple ideas that are in here that I think could work very well if you exported them to D&D 5th Edition. So, I like that announcer prompt, you know, who's gonna win? I don't know. It's really going to be up to you and your preferences. By the end of this, you are either going to love or hate one or the other. Or tolerate them both. I don't know. I don't want to make it some extreme black and white, you know, binary on-off option kind of a thing. Yeah, there is a lot of history in Pathfinder. I've been picking up in the lore. Mounted defenses. When you're mounted, attackers can target either you or your mount. Anything that targets multiple creatures, such as a spell with a burst area, affects both of you individually as long as you're both in the area. Your mount is larger than you and shares its space, so you are screened against attacks targeting you while you're mounted, if the mount would be in the way. You count as being in an attacker's reach or range if any square of your mount is within the attacker's reach or range. Because your movement is limited while you're riding a mount, you take a -2 circumstance penalty to reflex saves while mounted. Additionally, the only move action you can take is the mount basic action to dismount. Many monsters can fly, and PCs can use spells and items to gain the ability to fly. Flying creatures have to use the fly action to move through the air, making an especially tricky maneuver, such as trying to reverse course 180 degrees, fly through a narrow gap, or skim the surface of a body of water. Then there's a whole section on aquatic combat, because look, you can find yourself fighting underwater. Things like that happen. Circumstance penalties. You do gain resistance 5 to acid and fire by being underwater. 5 is better than nothing. Range attacks that deal bludgeoning or slashing damage automatically miss if the attacker or target is underwater, and piercing range attacks made by an underwater creature or against an underwater target have their range increments halved. You can't cast fire spells or use abilities with the fire trait underwater. At the GM's discretion, some ground-based actions might not work underwater or while floating. Neo Rome says, a lot of D&D peeps got tired of where D&D was going. They broke off forming Pathfinder. Pathfinder picked up speed, and 5th was the answer to the success of Pathfinder. Yeah, I agree. You know, when 4th came out, and especially because Wizards pulled the Dungeon and Dragon printing license from Paizo, there was now a need for Paizo to continue as a company. They already have experience printing all of this material for Wizards. And there was a group of D&D players who said, we like 3rd edition, and we want to continue playing it, but hopefully in a system that'll continually be updated. And so Pathfinder was born. It's kind of like Nintendo made the PlayStation by its actions, right? You know, one of Nintendo's, the big rivalry kind of a thing. Nintendo made its own rival in its interaction with Sony. Fluffy, and now it's better for everyone except 4E fans. Neo Realms, do those exist? Just kidding, Fluff. Only 40 fans are basically wargamers, so I like 4th edition. What I meant for artists was more work. Alright. We'll come to drowning and suffocating here shortly. I'm going to get up and take a break. If you all need a, you need a potty break, you want to go get a snack or pet your cat or, say hi to your doggo or whatever. Let's meet back here in 10 minutes, and we will continue going through the playtest materials. All right? Sound good? Sounds good to me, but I'm biased. Ready? Break!